The elevator lurched violently, throwing Victoria Sterling against the mahogany-paneled wall of the 42nd floor executive lift. Her Hermes bag scattered its contents across the floor as the lights flickered once, twice, then died completely. The soft hum of the air conditioning ceased, leaving only the sound of her rapid breathing in the suffocating darkness. Victoria, CEO of Sterling Dynamics and worth $3 billion, had never felt so powerless in her life. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Outside the towering glass structure of Sterling Tower, Marcus Rivera adjusted the torn collar of his weathered jacket against the October wind. He had been living in the alley behind the building for 3 weeks now, ever since the construction company he worked for went bankrupt and he lost his apartment. The cardboard beneath him was damp from the morning rain, and his stomach ached from the single granola bar he had managed to buy with the coins collected from yesterday's panhandling. Marcus was 51 years old, a former electrician with 25 years of experience, but none of that mattered when potential employers saw his current address listed as homeless. His calloused hands, once steady enough to wire entire office buildings, now shook slightly from the cold, as he held a crumpled resume that no one would ever read. The power outage hit Sterling Tower at exactly 2:47 p.m. on a Tuesday afternoon. Marcus watched from his spot in the alley as every light in the massive building went dark simultaneously. Emergency generators kicked in for the lobby and stairwells, but the elevators remained dead. Marcus knew this because he had helped install the backup systems in this very building 8 years ago, back when he had a job, a home, and hope for the future. Inside the elevator, Victoria's perfectly manicured fingers fumbled for her phone. The screen provided the only light in the metal box that had become her prison: no signal. She pressed the emergency button repeatedly, but the silence that followed confirmed her worst fears. The backup communication system had failed along with everything else. Victoria Sterling was not accustomed to being trapped. As the youngest female CEO to ever head a Fortune 500 company, she had built her empire on control, precision, and the ability to solve any problem with the right amount of money or influence. But here, suspended between floors and a powerless elevator shaft, neither her Harvard MBA nor her vast wealth could help her. The air grew thicker with each passing minute. Victoria loosened her Armani blazer and tried to calculate how much oxygen remained in the confined space. Her breathing became more labored, not from the air quality, but from the rising panic she had never learned to manage. For the first time in her adult life, Victoria Sterling was completely and utterly helpless. Marcus heard the faint banging first. It was rhythmic, desperate, coming from somewhere above him in the building. He stood up from his makeshift bed and listened more carefully. The sound was definitely human, someone pounding against metal. His trained ear recognized it immediately. Someone was trapped in an elevator shaft. Most people would have called security or the fire department, but Marcus had learned not to trust that help would come quickly for people like him. Homeless individuals were often ignored, their concerns dismissed, their emergencies deemed less urgent. But Marcus also knew something else. He was probably the only person within a mile radius who understood the electrical systems of this building intimately enough to potentially help. Victoria had been pounding on the elevator doors for 20 minutes when she heard a voice from the other side. It was rough, weathered, but unmistakably human. "Hey, can you hear me in there?" Victoria pressed herself against the door. Yes, I can hear you. I'm trapped between the 32nd and 33rd floors. My name's Marcus. How long have you been stuck?" "About 40 minutes. The power went out and everything just stopped. I can't get a signal on my phone." Marcus pressed his ear to the outer elevator doors. "Are you hurt? Any pain in your chest or trouble breathing?" "No injuries, but the air feels thin. I'm starting to feel dizzy." Marcus knew that feeling. The elevator cars in Sterling Tower were sealed tight for energy efficiency, but that meant limited air circulation during power failures. He estimated she had maybe 2 hours of breathable air left, less if she panicked and hyperventilated. "Listen to me carefully. Marcus said, his voice steady and calm. "I used to work on the electrical systems in this building. The main power grid failed, but I might be able to get the emergency elevator power back online. But I need you to stay calm and breathe slowly. Can you do that for me?" Victoria found herself oddly comforted by this stranger's voice. "Yes, I think so. What's your name again?" "Marcus Rivera." "And you are?" Victoria hesitated. She was used to people knowing who she was, used to her name opening doors and commanding immediate attention. But in this moment, suspended in darkness, her identity felt irrelevant. "Victoria," she said simply. "Okay, Victoria. I'm going to help you get out of there." Marcus knew he was taking an enormous risk. Accessing the building's electrical systems without authorization was technically breaking and entering, a charge that could land a homeless man like him in prison for years. But he also knew that someone's life was potentially at stake, and he had never been able to walk away from someone in trouble. The service entrance Marcus remembered from his construction days was still there, hidden behind a dumpster in the alley. The lock had been changed, but years of living on the streets had taught him creative problem-solving skills he never thought he would need. Within 10 minutes, he was inside the building's basement, standing in front of the main electrical panel he had helped design nearly a decade ago. The emergency lighting cast eerie shadows across the mechanical room as Marcus examined the power distribution system. The main grid had failed due to a blown transformer, but the emergency generators were functioning. The problem was in the relay switches that controlled elevator power during emergencies. Someone had installed a new safety protocol that shut down all elevator power during building-wide outages, a well-intentioned safety measure that had become a death trap for anyone caught inside. Marcus found his old toolkit in a forgotten storage closet, still there from a project he had never finished. His hands moved with muscle memory, testing circuits, checking voltages, tracing the complex web of wires that controlled the building's nervous system. This was the work he had loved, the work that had given his life meaning before everything fell apart. Meanwhile, Victoria sat in the darkness, her mind racing through all the things she had never said, never done, never allowed herself to feel. She thought about her assistant, Rebecca, who had been trying for months to get her to slow down, to take a vacation, to spend time with something other than quarterly reports and board meetings. She thought about her sister in California, who had stopped calling after Victoria missed her daughter's graduation for the third consecutive year due to a crucial business meeting. "Marcus?" Victoria called out. "Are you still there?" "I'm here." His voice came back, slightly muffled now that he was in the basement. "I'm working on the power issue." "How are you feeling?" "Scared," Victoria admitted, surprising herself with her honesty. "I've never been scared of anything before. At least, nothing I couldn't buy my way out of or negotiate around." Marcus paused in his work. "Fear's not a bad thing. Keeps us human. What do you do for work, Victoria?" Victoria almost laughed at the irony. "I run a company. A big one, actually. We build things, acquire other companies, make lots of money for shareholders." She paused. "It all sounds pretty meaningless when you say it out loud in a broken... Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Elevator. "Building things isn't meaningless," Marcus replied, carefully adjusting a relay switch. "I used to build things too. Wired office buildings, shopping centers, hospitals. There's something good about creating something that wasn't there before. Something that helps people. What happened? Why aren't you doing that anymore?" Marcus was quiet for so long that Victoria thought he might have left. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer, more vulnerable. "Company I worked for went under. 25 years of experience didn't matter when the economy shifted and construction dried up. I was 50 years old, too young to retire but too old for most companies to want to train on new systems. Savings ran out after 8 months of unemployment, lost my apartment, then my car, then pretty much everything else." Victoria felt something she hadn't experienced in years, genuine empathy for another person's struggle. "I'm sorry, that's not fair." "Life's not fair," Marcus said matter-of-factly, "but that doesn't mean we stop trying to help each other when we can." The first relay clicked back into position with a satisfying snap. Marcus had managed to reroute power from the building's lighting grid to the elevator emergency systems. but it would only provide enough juice for one elevator car to move one time. He would have to choose exactly the right moment and execute the procedure perfectly. Victoria, I think I can get you moving, but I need you to listen very carefully to my instructions. I'm listening. When I restore power, you'll have maybe 60 seconds before the system shuts down again. The elevator will automatically go to the nearest floor, which should be 33, but the doors might not open automatically. When you feel the elevator stop, immediately press and hold the door open button. If that doesn't work, there's a manual release lever on the left side of the door frame, about chest high. Can you remember that? Door open button, then manual release on the left. Got it. Marcus took a deep breath and began the delicate process of restoring elevator power. He had to time it perfectly, bringing the systems online in the correct sequence to avoid triggering the safety shutdowns. One wrong move and Victoria would remain trapped, possibly until building maintenance arrived the next morning. The elevator hummed to life with a jolt that nearly knocked Victoria off her feet. The lights flickered on, and she felt the car begin to rise slowly. She counted the seconds as Marcus had instructed: 15, 30, 45. The elevator stopped with a gentle bump, and the floor indicator showed 33. Victoria immediately pressed the door open button. Nothing happened. She felt around the left side of the doorframe until her fingers found a small lever, which she pulled with all her strength. The doors opened just as the lights went out again, but she could see the hallway beyond, illuminated by emergency lighting. Victoria stumbled out of the elevator on unsteady legs, gasping the fresh air of the hallway. She had never been so grateful to stand on solid ground, but her first thought wasn't of her own safety or relief. It was of the man who had saved her life. "Marcus!" she called out, her voice echoing in the empty hallway. "Marcus! Thank you!" She could hear his voice faintly through the building's ventilation system. "You're welcome, Victoria. Are you okay?" "I'm okay. Where are you?" "I want to meet you properly, to thank you in person." There was a long pause before Marcus responded. "I should probably go. Building security will be here soon, and they won't be happy to find someone like me inside." Victoria understood what he meant by "someone like me," and it made her feel ashamed of assumptions she had never questioned before. This man had risked his own freedom to save her life, and now he was preparing to disappear back into the shadows because he believed that was what society expected of him. "Wait," Victoria called out. "Please don't go. I want to help you." "You don't owe me anything, Victoria. Just take care of yourself." Victoria found the stairwell and began making her way down to the basement, her high heels echoing off the concrete steps. She had to find Marcus before he disappeared. For the first time in her adult life, she had met someone who had acted with pure selflessness, expecting nothing in return, and she couldn't let him walk away without at least trying to repay his kindness. The basement was a maze of mechanical rooms and storage areas, lit only by the dim glow of emergency lighting. Victoria called Marcus's name as she searched, her voice growing more desperate with each empty room she discovered. She finally found him in the electrical room, carefully putting tools back into an old kit box. He looked up as she entered, and Victoria got her first clear look at the man who had saved her life. Marcus Rivera was tall and lean, with graying hair and kind eyes that seemed much older than his 51 years. His clothes were worn but clean, and his hands bore the calluses and small scars of someone who had worked with them his entire life. Despite his circumstances, he carried himself with a dignity that Victoria found both humbling and inspiring. "You didn't have to come down here," Marcus said quietly. "I told you, you don't owe me anything." Victoria stepped closer, and for the first time noticed the small details that told the story of Marcus's current situation. The way his jacket was layered over 2 shirts for warmth. The careful way he moved, preserving energy and avoiding unnecessary exertion. The fact that he was putting the tools back exactly where he had found them, leaving no trace of his presence. "Maybe I don't owe you anything," Victoria said, "but I want to do something. You saved my life, Marcus. You risked your own freedom to help a complete stranger. That means something." Marcus finished packing the toolkit and looked at her directly. "I did what anyone would have done." "No," Victoria said firmly. "You did what almost no one would have done. You could have called for help and walked away. You could have ignored me completely. Instead, you broke into a building and used skills that most people don't have to save someone you'd never met. That's not what anyone would do. That's what a hero does. Marcus was uncomfortable with the praise. He had never seen himself as heroic, just as someone trying to get through each day with his integrity intact. But there was something in Victoria's eyes, a sincerity he hadn't encountered in a long time, that made him believe she truly meant what she was saying. "What's your story, Victoria?" Marcus asked. "I told you mine." "Fair's fair." Victoria realized she had never been asked that question by someone who genuinely wanted to know the answer. Not because they were trying to impress her or get something from her, but out of simple human curiosity. "I built a company from nothing," she said, sitting on a crate across from Marcus. "Worked 18-hour days. Sacrificed everything for success. I have more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes, but I just realized I don't have a single person in my life who would risk anything to save me. Except you, a man I met an hour ago." Marcus studied her face in the dim light. "Money can't buy everything." "No, it can't. But it can do some things. It can give people second chances. It can provide opportunities." Victoria paused, choosing her words carefully. "I'd like to offer you a job, Marcus." Marcus shook his head immediately. "I don't want charity." "It's not charity. It's business. You just demonstrated that you know the electrical systems in my building better than anyone currently on my payroll. You solved a problem in 40 minutes that would have taken my maintenance team hours to figure out, assuming they could have figured it out at all. I need someone with your skills and experience. I'm 51 years old and I've been homeless for 3 months. Most companies wouldn't even let me through the front door." Victoria smiled for the first time since the elevator had stopped. "Well, it's a good thing I own the company then." Marcus wanted to believe her, but years of rejection had taught him to be cautious about hope. "What kind of job?" "Building maintenance supervisor. You'd oversee the electrical and mechanical systems for Sterling Tower and 2 other properties I own. The position pays $90,000 a year plus benefits, and it comes with a housing allowance for the first year while you get back on your feet." Marcus stared at her in disbelief. $90,000 was more than he had made in his previous job, more than he had ever dreamed of earning. But more than the money, it was the chance to do meaningful work again, to use his skills for something important. "Why would you do this?" he asked quietly. Victoria considered the question. She could have given him a dozen business-related reasons, talked about his qualifications and her company's needs. But the truth was simpler and more personal. "Because an hour ago, I was trapped in the dark, scared, and completely helpless. And you saved me. Not because you had to, not because you knew who I was or what I could do for you, but because it was the right thing to do. That tells me everything I need to know about your character." Marcus felt tears welling up in his eyes, the first tears he had allowed himself since losing his apartment. For months, he had felt invisible, worthless, forgotten by a society that had no use for aging workers with obsolete skills. But Victoria saw something in him that he had almost forgotten about himself. Value, worth, the capacity to contribute something meaningful to the world. "I accept," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you, Victoria. You don't know what this means to me." Victoria reached out and shook his hand, a formal gesture that somehow felt like the beginning of something much more significant than an employment agreement. Building security arrived 20 minutes later, followed by the fire department and a crew from the electric company. Victoria met them in the lobby, where she explained that she had been trapped in the elevator during the power outage but had been rescued by a member of her maintenance staff who happened to be in the building. Marcus stood beside her, no longer the homeless man hiding in the alley, but Victoria Sterling's newly appointed building maintenance supervisor. The security guards, who might have arrested him an hour earlier, now treated him with the respect accorded to any other employee of Sterling Dynamics. Over the following weeks, Marcus proved that Victoria's faith in him was well-founded. He not only maintained the building systems with exceptional skill, but he also identified and corrected numerous safety issues that previous maintenance crews had overlooked. His 25 years of experience, combined with his natural problem-solving abilities, made him invaluable to the organization. But the changes in Marcus's life went beyond professional success. Victoria had arranged for him to stay in a corporate apartment until he could find permanent housing, and she had connected him with a company that specialized in helping formerly homeless individuals rebuild their lives. Within 2 months, Marcus had his own apartment, a reliable car, and a savings account that grew with each paycheck. More importantly, Marcus had regained something he thought he had lost forever: purpose. Every morning he woke up knowing that his skills and experience mattered, that people depended on him, that he was making a meaningful contribution to something larger than himself. Victoria, meanwhile, found herself changed by the experience as well. The hours she had spent trapped in darkness had forced her to confront the emptiness of her personal life, and Marcus's example of selfless compassion had inspired her to look beyond quarterly profits and shareholder value. She began visiting her sister in California, rekindling a relationship that had grown cold from years of neglect. She started a scholarship program for older workers who had been displaced by economic changes, providing retraining opportunities for people in situations similar to Marcus's. Most significantly, she began seeing her employees as individuals rather than resources, taking time to learn their names, understand their challenges, and recognize their contributions. The story might have ended there, a simple tale of one good deed leading to mutual benefit. But Victoria Sterling was not content with simple solutions to complex problems. She had learned that Marcus Rivera was not unique in his combination of valuable skills and unfortunate circumstances. Across the country, thousands of experienced workers had been displaced by economic shifts, technological changes, and age discrimination, creating a vast pool of untapped talent that society had chosen to overlook. Working with Marcus and a team of social workers, Victoria developed a comprehensive program called Second Foundations. The initiative identified homeless individuals with valuable work experience, provided them with temporary housing and support services, and placed them in positions where their skills could be utilized effectively. The program was controversial at first. Board members questioned whether Victoria was running a charity or a business. Shareholders worried about the bottom line. Critics suggested that the program was nothing more than an expensive public relations stunt. But the results spoke for themselves. Second Foundation's participants brought decades of experience to their new roles, often outperforming younger workers who lacked their depth of knowledge and work ethic. Turnover rates among program participants were virtually zero, and many went on to become supervisors and trainers themselves. Within 2 years, Victoria had expanded the program to include partnerships with other major corporations. Companies across multiple industries began to recognize that experienced workers who had fallen through society's cracks represented an extraordinary untapped resource. Marcus became the program's first success story, and eventually its director of operations. His job was to identify potential participants, assess their skills, and match them with appropriate opportunities. It was work that combined his technical expertise with his hard-earned understanding of what it meant to be forgotten by society. 1 year after the elevator incident, Victoria and Marcus stood together on the observation deck of Sterling Tower, looking out over the city that had once seemed to have no place for either of them. Victoria had been trapped by the golden cage of her own success, isolated by wealth and power that had cost her every meaningful relationship in her life. Marcus had been trapped by circumstances beyond his control, his value as a human being reduced to his current address and employment status. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if the power hadn't gone out that day?" Victoria asked. Marcus smiled. "I think we both know the answer to that. You would have made it to your meeting, and I would have spent another night in the alley. We never would have met, and both of us would have been poorer for it." Victoria nodded. "I used to think that success meant having control over everything, being able to buy solutions to any problem. But that day in the elevator taught me that sometimes the most important things happen when we're completely powerless, when we have to depend on the kindness of strangers. And sometimes," Marcus added, "the people we least expect to help us turn out to be exactly who we needed to meet." The Second Foundations program continued to grow, eventually helping thousands of displaced workers find new purpose and stability. Victoria's company became a model for corporate social responsibility, proving that businesses could be both profitable and compassionate. But perhaps the most significant change was in the relationship between Victoria and Marcus themselves. What had begun as a desperate rescue in a broken elevator had evolved into a deep friendship based on mutual respect, shared values, and the understanding that everyone deserves a second chance. Marcus never forgot the lesson he had learned in the alley behind Sterling Tower, that a person's worth is not determined by their circumstances, but by their willingness to help others even when they have little to give. And Victoria never forgot that the most valuable gifts in life cannot be purchased, only freely given by one human being to another. The elevator in Sterling Tower was repaired and upgraded with additional safety features, but Victoria rarely used it anymore. She preferred taking the stairs when possible. A small daily reminder of the day when being trapped in a small, dark space had opened her eyes to the vast possibilities that existed when people chose to see the best in each other rather than the worst. On quiet evenings when the building was empty except for security guards and cleaning crews, Marcus would sometimes find himself back in the basement electrical room where his life had changed forever. He would run his hands over the switches and circuits that had given him the power to save someone's life, and he would think about all the other Marcus Riveras out there, sleeping in alleys and doorways, their potential locked away by circumstances and society's indifference. But he no longer felt helpless about their situation, because he had learned something important in that basement, that everyone has the power to change someone else's life, regardless of their own circumstances. Sometimes it requires technical skills and knowledge. Sometimes it only requires compassion and the willingness to see another person's humanity. The plaque in the Sterling Tower lobby, installed on the first anniversary of the incident, read simply, "In recognition that the greatest achievements come not from what we build for ourselves, but from what we build for each other." It was signed by Victoria Sterling and Marcus Rivera, two people who had discovered that the distance between the penthouse and the alley was much smaller than either had ever imagined. And in the end, that may have been the most important lesson of all, that we are all just one broken elevator, one moment of crisis, one act of unexpected kindness away from discovering who we really are and who we have the potential to become. 6 months had passed since Marcus Rivera's first day as building maintenance supervisor, and the changes in his life were so profound that some mornings he still woke up wondering if it was all an elaborate dream. The corporate apartment Victoria had arranged for him had become his sanctuary, a place where he could shower whenever he wanted, sleep on clean sheets, and open a refrigerator full of food he had purchased with his own paycheck. But the transformation went deeper than material comfort. Marcus had rediscovered parts of himself he thought were lost forever. His hands, once steady only when holding tools, now moved with renewed confidence as he navigated the complex systems that kept Sterling Tower running smoothly. The other maintenance staff, initially skeptical of the new supervisor who had seemingly appeared from nowhere, had come to respect his expertise and gentle leadership style. Victoria found herself spending more time in the building's mechanical spaces than she ever had before, not because there were problems to solve, but because she enjoyed watching Marcus work. There was something meditative about the way he approached each task, methodical but never rushed, always considering the broader implications of every adjustment he made to the building's intricate systems. On this particular Tuesday morning, Victoria was reviewing quarterly reports in her office when her assistant knocked on the door with an expression of barely contained excitement. "Miss Sterling, there's someone here to see you. He says it's about Marcus Rivera." Victoria's stomach tightened with worry. In her experience, unexpected visitors asking about employees rarely brought good news. "Send him in." The man who entered her office was in his 60s, wearing a well-tailored suit and carrying a leather briefcase that spoke of success and authority. His gray hair was perfectly styled, and his handshake was firm but not aggressive. "Ms. Sterling, my name is David Chen. I'm the senior partner at Chen, Morrison & Associates. We're a large construction firm based in Seattle." He settled into the chair across from her desk. "I'm here because of something quite remarkable that happened last week." Victoria waited, her expression neutral but her mind racing through possibilities. David opened his briefcase and withdrew a thick folder. "We were hired to renovate a 40-story office complex downtown. The building's electrical system was installed in the early 2000s, and the original blueprints had been lost in a fire. Our engineers spent weeks trying to map the existing wiring, but they kept running into dead ends and inconsistencies." Victoria nodded, still not seeing where this was leading. Then one of our junior electricians mentioned that he had a friend who used to work construction in this city, someone with an exceptional memory for building systems. He suggested we consult with this person, even though he warned us the man had fallen on hard times. Victoria's pulse quickened. She had a feeling she knew where this story was going. We were desperate enough to try anything, so we asked this person to take a look at our problem. Miss Sterling, your maintenance supervisor, walked into that building, spent 20 minutes examining the electrical panels, and then drew a complete schematic of the entire 40 floors from memory. Not only was he accurate, but he identified 3 major safety violations that our own engineers had missed. David leaned forward, his eyes bright with professional admiration. Marcus Rivera saved our company approximately $2 million in exploratory work and potential lawsuits. More importantly, he may have prevented a catastrophic electrical fire that could have killed dozens of people. Victoria felt a surge of pride mixed with something deeper, a recognition that Marcus's value extended far beyond what even she had initially understood. "What's your point, Mr. Chen?" she asked, though she suspected she already knew. "I want to hire him. We're prepared to offer him a position as our chief electrical systems consultant at twice his current salary, plus equity in the company, and a signing bonus of $100,000. The offer was generous, more generous than Victoria could match. Any reasonable person would have advised Marcus to take it, but the thought of losing him, of watching him walk away from Sterling Dynamics, filled Victoria with an unexpected sense of loss. "Have you spoken to Marcus about this?" Victoria asked carefully. "Not yet. Professional courtesy dictated that I speak with his current employer first. I wanted to give you the opportunity to make a counteroffer if you choose to match our terms." Victoria stood and walked to the window, looking down at the busy street below. She could match the salary, even exceed it, but that wasn't really the issue. The question was whether she had the right to stand in the way of an opportunity that could transform Marcus's life even more dramatically than her original job offer had. "Mr. Chen, I appreciate your courtesy in coming to me first, but I think this decision should be Marcus's to make. You have my permission to approach him directly with your offer." David Chen seemed surprised by her response. Most executives would have immediately begun negotiating or tried to bind their valuable employee with a restrictive contract. "Are you certain, Miss Sterling? An employee of his caliber is difficult to replace." Victoria smiled. "I'm certain. If Marcus chooses to leave, I'll wish him well. If he chooses to stay, it will be because he wants to be here, not because I prevented him from exploring his options." After David Chen left, Victoria sat alone in her office, staring at the quarterly reports that suddenly seemed trivial in comparison to the larger questions his visit had raised. She had given Marcus a second chance, but now she had to be prepared for the possibility that he might choose a different path forward. 3 floors down, Marcus was troubleshooting a ventilation system that had been acting erratically for the past week. The work required him to crawl through narrow maintenance spaces, flashlight in hand, following the ductwork through the building's hidden arteries. It was physically demanding work, but Marcus found it satisfying in a way that sitting behind a desk never could be. He was so focused on his task that he didn't hear David Chen enter the mechanical room until the man spoke. "Excuse me, are you Marcus Rivera?" Marcus backed out of the ductwork and stood up, brushing dust from his work clothes. "Yes, that's me. Can I help you with something?" David extended his hand. "My name is David Chen. I'd like to speak with you about a business opportunity, if you have a few minutes." Marcus recognized the signs of an expensive suit and professional success, but something in David's manner suggested this wasn't a sales call or a complaint about building services. "Sure, let me just shut off this system so we can talk without the noise." As David explained the Seattle construction project and Marcus's inadvertent contribution to its success, Marcus found himself remembering the satisfaction he had felt walking through that building, seeing problems that others had missed, knowing that his experience and expertise could prevent disaster. "The position I'm offering," David continued, "would allow you to work on projects across the Pacific Northwest. You'd be consulting on some of the most complex electrical systems in the region, solving problems that challenge even our most experienced engineers." The offer was everything Marcus could have hoped for and more. Financial security beyond his wildest dreams, professional recognition, the opportunity to do the kind of high-level work he had always aspired to but never had the chance to pursue. "It's an incredible opportunity," Marcus said carefully, "but I need to think about it. I have obligations here, people who depend on me." David nodded understandingly. Of course. Take all the time you need. Here's my card. The offer will remain open for 2 weeks. After David left, Marcus sat in the quiet mechanical room, weighing the decision before him. 6 months ago, he would have accepted such an offer without hesitation, grateful for any chance to escape the uncertainty and indignity of homelessness. But his time at Sterling Dynamics had given him something more valuable than financial security. It had given him a sense of belonging, of being part of something meaningful. That evening, Marcus found himself standing outside Victoria's office as she prepared to leave for the day. She looked up from her briefcase and smiled when she saw him. "Marcus, perfect timing. I was just heading out. Walk with me to the parking garage?" As they rode the elevator down together, Marcus noticed that Victoria seemed unusually quiet, almost melancholy. It wasn't until they reached her car that she finally spoke. "I met with David Chen today. He told me about the Seattle project and the offer he made you." Marcus nodded. "I figured he might have spoken with you first." "It's a generous offer." Victoria unlocked her car, but didn't get in immediately. "It's more than generous. It's the kind of opportunity that could change your entire life trajectory." "Maybe. But I've been thinking about what really constitutes a life-changing opportunity." Victoria looked at him curiously. 6 months ago, I was sleeping in an alley, wondering if I had any value left as a human being. You gave me a chance when no one else would, not just a job, but a purpose. You saw something in me that I had forgotten about myself." Marcus leaned against the concrete pillar next to Victoria's car. "David Chen's offer is about money and professional prestige. Those are important things, but they're not everything. What you gave me was the chance to remember who I am, to use my skills to help people, to be part of a community that values what I can contribute." Victoria felt her throat tighten with emotion. "Marcus, you don't owe me anything. I gave you a job because you earned it, because you saved my life and proved your worth. If this other opportunity is better for you, you should take it." "That's just it, though." "Better for me how? More money? A bigger title?" "I spent 25 years chasing those things, and when the economy shifted, all of that status evaporated overnight. But what we're building here, what you've started with the Second Foundations program, that's something that creates lasting value for people who really need it." Victoria was quiet for a long moment, processing what Marcus was saying. "You're thinking of staying?" "I'm thinking about what kind of legacy I want to leave. Do I want to be remembered as someone who helped solve interesting technical problems for wealthy corporations? Or as someone who helped create a system that gives hope to people society has written off?" Marcus straightened up and looked directly at Victoria. "I want to turn down David Chen's offer and instead propose something different. I want to expand the Second Foundations program. I want to create a comprehensive system that not only places displaced workers, but provides them with ongoing support, training opportunities, and pathways to leadership roles." Victoria felt her heart racing with excitement. "That's ambitious. It would require significant resources, partnerships with other organizations, maybe even legislative support." "I know. But I also know it's possible because I've lived both sides of it. I know what it feels like to be invisible and what it takes to become visible again. And I know there are thousands of people out there with valuable skills who just need someone to believe in them." Victoria extended her hand to Marcus, the same formal gesture they had shared in the basement 6 months earlier. "Partners? Partners?" The expansion of Second Foundations began with a comprehensive study of displaced workers across the metropolitan area. Victoria hired a team of social researchers to identify the scope of the problem, while Marcus reached out to his contacts in various industries to understand where skilled workers were most needed. What they discovered was both heartbreaking and inspiring. There were former engineers living in shelters, experienced teachers working minimum-wage jobs, skilled craftspeople whose industries had been automated away. But there were also stories of resilience, of people maintaining their dignity and skills despite circumstances that would have broken many others. Marcus insisted on personally interviewing every potential program participant. He had learned that behind every story of displacement was a human being with unique strengths, challenges, and dreams. The program couldn't be successful if it treated people as interchangeable units to be processed and placed. One of his first interviews was with Elena Rodriguez, a 53-year-old former aerospace engineer who had been unemployed for 14 months after her company relocated its operations overseas. She had been living in her car for 3 months, showering at a local community center and spending her days at the public library, applying for jobs that never responded to her inquiries. "I have 2 master's degrees and 28 years of experience designing navigation systems for commercial aircraft," Elena told Marcus during their interview. "But somehow I can't even get called back for entry-level positions." Marcus recognized the pain in her voice, the bewilderment of someone who had played by all the rules only to discover that the rules had changed while she wasn't looking. "Tell me about the most challenging project you ever worked on," he said. Elena's entire demeanor changed as she began describing a navigation system she had developed for planes flying in extreme weather conditions. Her technical knowledge was impressive, but what struck Marcus was her passion for solving problems that could save lives, her dedication to precision and safety. Within 2 weeks, Marcus had placed Elena with an engineering firm that specialized in infrastructure projects. Her aerospace background proved invaluable for designing systems that needed to function reliably under extreme conditions. More importantly, her supervisor later told Marcus that Elena's experience with regulatory compliance and safety protocols had improved the entire team's approach to quality control. But Elena's placement was just the beginning. Marcus realized that many program participants had knowledge and skills that extended beyond their official job descriptions. Elena, for example, spoke fluent Spanish and had experience training junior engineers. Marcus suggested that she could also serve as a mentor for other Second Foundation's participants who were struggling with technical interviews or workplace communication. This insight led to the development of the program's peer mentorship component. Participants who successfully transitioned to new careers were invited to stay connected with the program, offering guidance and support to newcomers who were facing similar challenges. The mentorship network quickly became one of Second Foundation's most valuable resources. Former participants understood the emotional and practical challenges of starting over in a way that even the most empathetic social workers couldn't fully grasp. They could offer specific advice about navigating workplace politics after extended unemployment, managing the psychological adjustment of having regular income again, or dealing with well-meaning colleagues who made assumptions about their background. Victoria watched the program evolve with a mixture of professional satisfaction and personal amazement. She had always been good at identifying market opportunities and developing business strategies, but Marcus had taught her to see human potential in ways she never had before. "You've created something remarkable," she told him one evening as they reviewed the program's 6-month progress report. "Our placement rate is 93%, and the retention rate after 1 year is 87%. Those numbers are better than most traditional employment agencies achieve with clients who have perfect resumes." Marcus smiled but seemed more focused on the individual stories than the statistics. Numbers are important, but what really matters is that people like Elena are designing infrastructure projects again, people like Robert are teaching welding to apprentices, people like Maria are managing restaurant operations. They're contributing their skills where they're needed most. "Have you given any more thought to David Chen's offer?" Victoria asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "I called him last week and officially declined. But I also suggested that his company might be interested in partnering with Second Foundations. They're always looking for experienced workers for specialized projects." Victoria raised an eyebrow. And he's flying in next month to discuss a formal partnership. Apparently, his experience with my consultation convinced him that there's untapped talent in the displaced worker population. This was exactly the kind of strategic thinking that Victoria most admired about Marcus. He had turned down a lucrative personal opportunity, but found a way to create an even more valuable institutional relationship that would benefit many people over time. The success of Second Foundations began attracting attention from other cities and organizations. Victoria received calls from mayors, corporate executives, and nonprofit leaders who wanted to understand how the program worked and whether it could be replicated in their communities. Marcus found himself traveling frequently, consulting with organizations that were interested in developing their own versions of the program. Each city presented unique challenges and opportunities, but the core principles remained the same. See people's potential rather than their circumstances, provide practical support combined with genuine respect, and create pathways for long-term success rather than temporary fixes. In Portland, Oregon, Marcus helped establish a program focused specifically on displaced timber workers, whose industries had been transformed by environmental regulations and technological changes. Many of these workers had decades of experience with complex machinery and safety protocols that translated well to renewable energy projects and sustainable construction. In Phoenix, Arizona, he worked with a coalition of healthcare organizations to place experienced administrative workers who had been displaced by hospital consolidations and electronic record systems. These workers' deep understanding of healthcare operations proved invaluable to clinics and specialty practices that needed experienced staff but couldn't afford to compete with large hospitals for talent. Each program adaptation taught Marcus something new about the diversity of human potential and the creative ways that experience could be applied to emerging challenges. But perhaps more importantly, each success reinforced his conviction that society's tendency to discard older workers was not just cruel, but economically wasteful. Back in Sterling Tower, Victoria was grappling with the challenge of scaling a program that had grown far beyond her original vision. Second Foundations was no longer just an initiative of Sterling Dynamics. It had become a national movement with its own momentum and resource requirements. "We need to make a decision about organizational structure," she told Marcus during one of their weekly planning meetings. "We can either keep the program as a subsidiary of Sterling Dynamics, or we can spin it off as an independent nonprofit organization." Marcus considered the implications of each option. Staying within Sterling Dynamics would provide financial stability and corporate resources, but it might limit the program's ability to attract funding from other sources or partner with competing organizations. Independence would offer greater flexibility, but would require developing entirely new funding streams and administrative systems. "What does your instinct tell you?" Marcus asked. Victoria smiled. 6 months ago, she would have made this decision based purely on financial projections and strategic analysis, but her partnership with Marcus had taught her to trust other forms of wisdom as well. "My instinct tells me that this program is bigger than any single company, including mine. It deserves the freedom to grow in directions we can't even imagine yet. Then let's set it free." The process of creating an independent Second Foundations organization took 6 months of legal work, fundraising, and relationship building. Victoria provided the initial endowment and served as the founding chair of the board of directors, while Marcus became the organization's first executive director. The transition was both exciting and terrifying. Victoria had spent her entire adult life building and controlling her business empire, but now she was deliberately creating something she couldn't control, something that would succeed or fail based on its own merits rather than her personal influence. Marcus, meanwhile, found himself in the unfamiliar position of running an organization with a multi-million-dollar budget and a staff of dozens of people. The skills that had made him an excellent electrician and building supervisor translated surprisingly well to organizational leadership, but he had to learn entirely new competencies in fundraising, public relations, and strategic planning. The learning curve was steep, but Marcus approached it the same way he approached any complex system: methodically, patiently, with attention to how all the components work together to achieve the desired outcome. One of his first major decisions as executive director was to establish regional offices in 5 cities across the country, each adapted to the specific economic conditions and workforce challenges of its area. Rather than imposing a rigid national model, Marcus encouraged each office to develop innovative approaches that reflected local needs and opportunities. The Denver office, for example, specialized in placing displaced oil and gas workers in renewable energy projects. The economic transition away from fossil fuels had left many experienced workers unemployed, but their technical skills in drilling, pipeline construction, and project management were directly applicable to geothermal energy, wind farm construction, and solar installation projects. The Detroit office focused on automotive workers whose jobs had been eliminated by automation and factory closures. Many of these workers had sophisticated understanding of manufacturing processes, quality control, and lean production systems that proved valuable to emerging industries like electric vehicle production and advanced manufacturing. Each regional office developed its own network of employer partners, mentorship programs, and support services. But they all shared the core Second Foundations philosophy that every person has valuable skills and potential, regardless of their current circumstances. As the organization grew, Marcus insisted on maintaining the personal approach that had made the original program successful. Every participant still received individual assessment and personalized support, even as the number of people served expanded from dozens to hundreds to thousands. "We're not a job placement agency," Marcus reminded his staff during quarterly meetings. "We're in the business of helping people rediscover their own worth and potential. The job placements are just the visible outcome of that deeper transformation." This philosophy attracted talented staff members who shared Marcus's commitment to human dignity and potential. Social workers, career counselors, and business development specialists joined the organization not for the salary, which was competitive but not exceptional, but for the opportunity to do work that created meaningful change in people's lives. Victoria remained deeply involved in Second Foundations as board chair, but she also found that the organization's success had transformed her own perspective on business and leadership. Sterling Dynamics began implementing programs that reflected the same values that guided Second Foundations, seeing employees as complete human beings rather than just workers, providing opportunities for professional development and career transition, creating a workplace culture that valued experience and wisdom alongside innovation and efficiency. The changes at Sterling Dynamics didn't go unnoticed by other business leaders. Victoria began receiving invitations to speak at conferences about the business case for social responsibility, the hidden costs of age discrimination in hiring, and the competitive advantages that companies could gain by tapping into underutilized talent pools. "What I learned from Marcus and Second Foundations," she told an audience of CEOs at a leadership summit, "is that our traditional approach to human resources is both morally wrong and economically inefficient. When we write off experienced workers because of their age or employment history, we're throwing away decades of knowledge, problem-solving ability, and work ethic that can't be replaced by hiring recent college graduates." Her presentations always included specific examples of Second Foundation's participants who had brought exceptional value to their new employers. Elena Rodriguez, the aerospace engineer, had developed a new approach to infrastructure inspection that was being adopted by engineering firms across the country. Robert Chen, a displaced manufacturing supervisor, had improved safety protocols at his new company by 40% in his first year. Maria Santos, a former restaurant manager, had launched a catering business that now employed 12 people and was expanding to a second location. These stories resonated with business audiences because they demonstrated concrete returns on investment, but they also challenged fundamental assumptions about what constituted valuable experience and how to identify potential in job candidates. 2 years after its founding, Second Foundations was serving more than 10,000 people annually across 15 cities, with a network of over 500 employer partners and a 94% placement rate. The organization had become financially sustainable through a combination of corporate partnerships, foundation grants, and government contracts, proving that social impact programs could be both effective and economically viable. But for Marcus, the most meaningful measure of success wasn't found in annual reports or statistical summaries. It was found in the individual transformations he witnessed every day. The moment when a long unemployed worker realized that their skills were still valuable, the phone call from an employer asking for more program graduates because they consistently outperformed other new hires, the thank you letter from a participant's family member expressing gratitude for giving their loved one hope again. One such letter came from the daughter of James Morrison, a 62-year-old former newspaper editor who had been unemployed for over a year after his paper closed. Through Second Foundations, James had been placed with a nonprofit organization that needed someone to manage their communications and publications. Within 6 months, he had revitalized their newsletter, improved their website, and increased their donor engagement by 50%. "Dear Mr. Rivera," his daughter wrote, "I wanted you to know that my father is a different person since joining your program. For months, he barely left the house. He felt like his career and his life were over. Now he wakes up every morning excited about his work and proud of his contributions. You didn't just find him a job. You gave him back his sense of purpose and self-worth. Our entire family is grateful." Letters like this reminded Marcus why he had chosen to stay with Second Foundations, rather than pursue the lucrative consulting position David Chen had offered. Money could provide security and comfort, but it couldn't provide the deep satisfaction that came from knowing his work was changing lives in fundamental ways. As Second Foundations entered its 3rd year, Marcus began thinking about the next phase of the organization's development. The program had proven that displaced workers could be successfully placed in new careers, but Marcus wanted to address some of the systemic issues that created displacement in the first place. Working with Victoria and the board of directors, Marcus developed a proposal for an advocacy initiative that would work to change hiring practices, challenge age discrimination, and promote policies that supported worker retraining and career transitions. The goal was not just to help individuals recover from displacement, but to create economic systems that valued experience and provided pathways for workers to adapt to changing industries. "We've proven that the problem isn't with older workers or displaced workers," Marcus explained to the board. "The problem is with systems that treat human beings as disposable. If we want to create lasting change, we need to address those systems directly." Victoria supported the advocacy initiative enthusiastically, seeing it as a natural evolution of the work they had started in that basement electrical room 3 years earlier. They had begun by saving one person trapped in an elevator, then expanded to helping thousands of people trapped by economic circumstances. Now they were ready to work on changing the systems that created those traps in the first place. The announcement of Second Foundation's advocacy initiative attracted attention from policymakers, researchers, and other organizations working on employment issues. Marcus found himself testifying before congressional committees about the economic costs of age discrimination, consulting with state governments about workforce development strategies, and collaborating with universities on research about the changing nature of work and careers. But even as Second Foundations expanded its scope and influence, Marcus remained committed to the hands-on personal approach that had made the program successful. He still conducted interviews with program participants when his schedule allowed, still visited regional offices to meet with staff and clients, still answered emails from people asking for advice about career transitions. "Never forget," he told his regional directors during a national conference, "that behind every policy issue and every statistical trend are individual human beings with hopes, fears, skills, and dreams. Our job is to see those individuals clearly and help them see themselves clearly. Everything else we do is in service of that fundamental mission." As Marcus spoke, Victoria sat in the audience, remembering the man she had first met in the darkness of a broken elevator. The homeless electrician who had risked his freedom to save a stranger had become a national leader in workforce development, a sought-after expert on employment policy, and a powerful advocate for economic justice. But more than that, Marcus had remained true to the values that had motivated him to help her in the first place. The belief that everyone deserves dignity, that everyone has something valuable to contribute, and that the willingness to help others, regardless of personal circumstances, is what makes us most human. The story of Second Foundations had begun with an act of individual kindness in a moment of crisis. It had grown into a national movement that was changing how society thought about work, aging, and human potential. But at its heart, it remained what it had always been: a recognition that the most important transformations happen when one person chooses to see the best in another, especially when that other person has forgotten how to see the best in themselves. 5 years had passed since that fateful Tuesday when Marcus Rivera first heard Victoria Sterling's voice through the elevator doors, and the world looked remarkably different from both of their perspectives. Second Foundations had grown into an international organization with offices in 12 countries, serving over 50,000 displaced workers annually and maintaining partnerships with more than 2,000 companies worldwide. Marcus stood before the United Nations General Assembly in New York, addressing delegates from around the globe about the economic and social costs of workplace displacement. His hair was now completely gray, and he wore a well-tailored suit that reflected his status as one of the world's leading experts on workforce transitions. But his voice still carried the same quiet conviction that had compelled him to help a stranger trapped in an elevator years earlier. "Honorable delegates," Marcus began, his words echoing through the vast assembly hall, "we gather today to discuss not just economic policy, but human dignity. When we allow experienced workers to be discarded by economic systems that value only youth and novelty, we waste not just individual potential, but the accumulated wisdom of generations." In the audience, Victoria listened with pride as Marcus presented research findings that Second Foundations had compiled over years of operation. The data was compelling. Companies that participated in Second Foundations programs showed 23% higher productivity rates, 31% lower turnover, and 19% better safety records compared to industry averages. But Marcus knew, as Victoria did, that the real story couldn't be captured in statistics alone. "Let me tell you about Chen Wei," Marcus continued, his tone becoming more personal. "A 60-year-old engineer from Shanghai, who lost his job when his factory automated its production line. Through our program, Chenwei now designs automation systems for small manufacturers who want to improve efficiency without eliminating jobs. His decades of hands-on experience have allowed him to create solutions that younger engineers, despite their technical training, could never have imagined. The delegates listened attentively as Marcus shared story after story of transformation, each one representing not just individual success but systemic change in how societies could approach economic transitions. These weren't just feel-good anecdotes. They were case studies in human capital optimization that governments and corporations around the world were beginning to recognize as essential for sustainable economic growth. After the presentation, Marcus found himself surrounded by ministers, ambassadors, and business leaders who wanted to understand how to implement similar programs in their own countries. The conversations continued late into the evening at a reception hosted by the Secretary General, where Marcus found himself discussing workforce development strategies with people whose decisions affected millions of lives. Victoria watched from across the room as Marcus engaged with world leaders with the same patience and genuine interest he had shown when interviewing program participants in their first small office. Success and recognition hadn't changed his fundamental approach to human interaction. If anything, his influence had made him more committed to ensuring that policy discussions remained grounded in the real experiences of real people. "He's remarkable," said Dr. Sarah Chen, the Secretary General's senior advisor on economic development, joining Victoria near the reception's floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the East River. "I've heard countless presentations on workforce development, but I've never seen someone connect global economic trends to individual human stories so effectively." Victoria smiled, remembering the man she had first met in a building's basement, carefully putting tools back where he had found them. Marcus has always understood that economic systems exist to serve people, not the other way around. That perspective becomes more valuable as the problems get more complex. Dr. Chen nodded thoughtfully. The Secretary General is considering proposing a global initiative on workforce transitions. Would Mr. Rivera be interested in leading such an effort? Victoria felt her pulse quicken. A UN-sponsored global initiative would represent an extraordinary opportunity to scale second foundations, impact to unprecedented levels, potentially affecting economic policy and workforce development strategies worldwide. But it would also mean enormous responsibility and pressure, requiring Marcus to navigate international politics and bureaucratic complexities that were far removed from the direct service work he loved. "That's a conversation you should have with Marcus directly," Victoria replied diplomatically. "But I can tell you that he's never backed down from a challenge when he believed it could help people." 3 hours later, Victoria and Marcus sat in the quiet bar of their Manhattan hotel, processing the events of an extraordinary day. Marcus had indeed been approached about the UN initiative, and the offer was even more comprehensive than Dr. Chen had initially suggested. He would lead a new international office for workforce transitions, with a budget of $500 million annually and the authority to coordinate programs across all UN member nations. "It's everything we dreamed about when we started," Victoria said, stirring her tea absently. "The chance to create systemic change on a global scale, to influence how entire countries think about human capital and economic transitions." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the city lights that stretched endlessly in every direction. "It is an incredible opportunity, but I keep thinking about something Elena Rodriguez told me last week when I visited the Denver office." Victoria remembered Elena, the aerospace engineer who had been one of Second Foundation's first placements and had since become a regional coordinator for the Rocky Mountain states. Elena said that the most important thing about our program isn't the job placement or even the career development. It's the moment when someone realizes that another human being sees their value, believes in their potential, and is willing to invest time and energy in their success. She said that personal connection is what makes transformation possible. Marcus turned back to Victoria. "My question is whether that kind of personal connection can exist in a global bureaucracy, no matter how well-intentioned. Can you really change individual lives when you're managing programs that serve millions of people across dozens of countries?" Victoria understood his dilemma. The UN position would give Marcus unprecedented influence and resources, but it might also distance him from the direct, human contact that had always been the source of his effectiveness and satisfaction. "What does your instinct tell you?" Victoria asked, echoing the question Marcus had posed to her years earlier, when she was deciding whether to spin off Second Foundations as an independent organization. Marcus smiled at the familiar phrase. My instinct tells me that there are already plenty of people in international organizations who understand policy and bureaucracy, but there aren't many who understand what it feels like to be forgotten by the economic system and what it takes to rebuild not just a career, but a sense of self-worth. So you're going to accept? I'm going to accept, but with conditions. I want to spend at least one day every month working directly with program participants. I want to maintain connections with our regional offices and frontline staff. And I want to ensure that any global initiative preserves the personal, individualized approach that makes our programs effective. Victoria raised her glass in a toast. To bringing humanity to global policy. To remembering that policy exists to serve people, not the other way around. The transition to Marcus's new role took 6 months of careful planning and relationship building. Victoria worked closely with the Second Foundation's board to identify Marcus's successor as executive director, ultimately choosing Dr. Jennifer Kim, a former labor economist who had left academia to work directly with displaced workers and had become one of the organization's most effective regional directors. Jennifer brought a unique combination of analytical rigor and practical experience to the role. She had spent 3 years running the Los Angeles office, where she had developed innovative approaches to serving workers displaced by the entertainment industry's technological transitions and the logistics sector's automation. Her academic background allowed her to document and replicate successful interventions, while her field experience ensured that programs remained focused on individual needs rather than bureaucratic efficiency. The challenge, Jennifer explained to Victoria during one of their transition meetings, is maintaining our culture and values as we continue to grow. Marcus created something special here, an organization that operates with both professional competence and genuine compassion. That's not easy to preserve as you scale up operations. Victoria had been grappling with similar challenges at Sterling Dynamics, which had grown significantly since implementing the management philosophy inspired by her work with Second Foundations. The company now employed over 15,000 people across multiple industries, and maintaining personal connections between leadership and frontline employees required constant attention and creative solutions. What I've learned, Victoria told Jennifer, is that culture isn't something you maintain through policies or mission statements. It's something you demonstrate through daily decisions and individual interactions. Every time a manager chooses to see an employee's potential rather than just their current performance, every time someone in leadership takes time to really listen to a frontline worker's concerns, you're reinforcing the values that make an organization special. Jennifer nodded, making notes in her ever-present notebook. Marcus always said that Second Foundation's real product isn't job placements or career transitions, it's hope. The challenge is figuring out how to manufacture hope at scale without losing its authenticity. As Marcus prepared for his new role at the United Nations, he found himself reflecting on how much had changed since that October afternoon when he had been living in an alley behind Sterling Tower. The material transformations were obvious. He now owned a comfortable apartment in Manhattan, had a savings account that could support him through any future economic downturns, and had achieved professional recognition that opened doors around the world. But the deeper changes were more significant. Marcus had rediscovered not just his professional skills, but his sense of purpose and connection to something larger than himself. The work with Second Foundations had taught him that individual actions could create ripple effects that transformed entire systems, that one person's willingness to help another could ultimately influence global economic policy. Marcus's first day at the United Nations began with a briefing from the Secretary General himself, followed by meetings with representatives from major donor countries, international development organizations, and global corporations that would be essential partners in any worldwide workforce transition initiative. The scale of the challenge was daunting. The International Labor Organization estimated that over 200 million people worldwide were either unemployed or significantly underemployed, with many of them displaced by technological changes, economic transitions, or political instability. Traditional approaches to workforce development had proven inadequate for addressing rapid changes in skill requirements and employment patterns. The question, explained Dr. Amara Okafor, the UN's chief economist, during Marcus's first strategy session, is whether the Second Foundations model can be adapted to work in countries with very different economic systems, cultural contexts, and institutional capabilities. Marcus had been anticipating this question, During his preparation for the role, he had traveled extensively to study workforce challenges in different regions, visiting displaced farmers in rural India, former factory workers in declining industrial cities in Eastern Europe, and young people in sub-Saharan Africa who had received education for jobs that didn't exist in their local economies. The specific interventions will need to be adapted to local contexts, Marcus replied, but the core principles are universal. People need to feel valued for their existing skills and experience. They need practical support during transitions. And they need to see pathways to meaningful work that allows them to contribute to their communities. Dr. Okafor leaned forward with interest. Can you give me a concrete example of how that might work in practice? Marcus pulled out his tablet and showed her a pilot program proposal he had been developing. In Bangladesh, we're working with textile workers whose jobs have been eliminated by automation. Instead of just retraining them for different factory work, we're helping them start cooperatives that produce high-quality, custom textiles for international markets. They're using the same skills they've always had, but in ways that give them more control over their work and higher compensation. The pilot program in Bangladesh had been one of Marcus's first international initiatives while still at Second Foundations. Working with local partners, they had identified experienced garment workers who had been displaced by factory modernization and helped them form producer cooperatives that emphasized quality and craftsmanship over mass production. The cooperatives had proven successful beyond anyone's initial expectations. By focusing on custom work and direct relationships with international buyers, the former factory workers were earning significantly more than they had in their previous jobs, while also gaining ownership stakes in their businesses. More importantly, they had regained the sense of pride and autonomy that had been lost when they became replaceable cogs in industrial machinery. That's fascinating, Dr. Okafor said, studying the program's outcomes data. You're essentially helping people transition from industrial employment back to artisanal production, but using modern marketing and distribution technologies. Exactly. Technology doesn't have to eliminate human skills. It can amplify them and connect them to global markets in ways that weren't possible before. The key is helping people see how their existing capabilities can be applied in new contexts. This conversation became the foundation for Marcus's global strategy. Rather than imposing a single model worldwide, the International Office for Workforce Transitions would develop a toolkit of principles and approaches that could be adapted to local economic conditions, cultural values, and institutional capacities. Over the following months, Marcus worked with teams in different regions to design pilot programs that reflected this philosophy. In Kenya, they partnered with agricultural cooperatives to help smallholder farmers transition to sustainable farming practices that commanded premium prices in international markets. In the Philippines, they worked with fishing communities affected by climate change to develop aquaculture enterprises that provided stable income while supporting marine conservation. Each program was different in its specific interventions, but all shared the same core commitment to building on people's existing strengths rather than treating displacement as evidence of obsolete skills. The most challenging pilot was in the Rust Belt of the American Midwest, where Marcus worked with former automotive workers whose manufacturing jobs had been lost to automation and global competition. These workers had deep technical skills and strong work ethics, but they had been told repeatedly that their experience was no longer relevant in a modern economy. Working with local community colleges and emerging technology companies, Marcus helped develop programs that trained automotive workers to maintain and repair industrial robots and automated systems. The irony wasn't lost on anyone involved. The same workers who had been displaced by automation were becoming the specialists responsible for keeping those systems running. "It's perfect," said Maria Santos, a former assembly line supervisor who had become a robotics technician. "I understand how things are supposed to work, because I've been doing this kind of precision manufacturing for 25 years. These young engineers who design the robots are brilliant, but they don't always understand what can go wrong in real-world conditions." Maria's success story became a model for similar programs in other regions. Workers who had been dismissed as obsolete were discovering that their practical experience was actually more valuable than ever in an economy that relied increasingly on complex technological systems. Victoria followed Marcus's global work closely, often serving as an informal advisor when he encountered challenges that paralleled her own experience scaling Second Foundations domestically. The friendship that had begun in a building's basement had evolved into a deep professional partnership based on shared values and complementary skills. The hardest part, Marcus told her during one of their monthly video calls, is maintaining hope when you're dealing with problems that affect millions of people. When you're working with individuals, you can see the direct impact of your efforts. When you're trying to influence global policy, success is measured in incremental changes that might not show results for years. Victoria understood his frustration. Remember when we started Second Foundations and you were worried about whether we could scale up personal attention? You figured out how to preserve the human element while serving thousands of people. This is the same challenge, just at a different magnitude. Maybe. But sometimes I wonder if I'm losing touch with what made me effective in the first place. When I was working directly with people like Elena and Robert, I could see their faces, understand their specific challenges, celebrate their individual victories. Now I spend most of my time in meetings discussing policy frameworks and funding mechanisms. Victoria had been thinking about this challenge herself as Sterling Dynamics continued to grow. What if you created a way to stay connected to individual stories within your global role? Not just visiting programs occasionally, but building direct contact with participants into your regular responsibilities? This conversation led to one of Marcus's most innovative initiatives at the UN, the Global Stories Project. Every month, Marcus would conduct video interviews with participants from different regional programs, sharing their experiences and insights with policymakers, donors, and other stakeholders around the world. The interviews served multiple purposes. They provided Marcus with direct feedback about program effectiveness and challenges. They gave participants a platform to share their perspectives with international audiences. And they helped global audiences understand workforce displacement as a human issue rather than just an economic statistic. One of the most powerful interviews was with Fatima al-Rashid, a Syrian refugee who had been a pediatric surgeon before fleeing her country's civil war. Through a UN program, Fatima had been placed with a medical research organization in Germany, where she was using her clinical experience to improve surgical techniques for treating children in conflict zones. "People see me as a refugee who needed help," Fatima explained during her interview with Marcus. "But I prefer to think of myself as a surgeon who found a new way to save children's lives. My experience treating young patients under impossible conditions has taught me things that can't be learned in any medical school." Fatima's interview was viewed by over 1 million people worldwide and helped change conversations about refugee integration, from discussions of charity and burden sharing to recognition of the valuable skills and perspectives that displaced people bring to their new communities. The Global Stories Project became one of the UN's most successful public communication initiatives, generating widespread media coverage and public support for workforce transition programs. But for Marcus, its real value was in keeping him connected to the human impact of policy decisions made in conference rooms thousands of miles away from the people those policies affected. As the International Office for Workforce Transitions completed its second year of operation, Marcus found himself facing a new kind of challenge. The program's success had attracted attention from political leaders who wanted to use workforce development as a tool for advancing other policy objectives. Some governments wanted to emphasize programs that kept displaced workers in their home countries, using workforce development as an alternative to migration policies that were becoming increasingly controversial. Others wanted to focus on high-tech training programs that would enhance their countries' competitiveness in emerging industries, regardless of whether those programs served the workers who most needed support. The problem, Marcus explained to Victoria during one of their conversations, is that once you achieve a certain level of success and visibility, everyone wants to use your work to advance their own agendas. People who never cared about displaced workers suddenly become interested when they realize that workforce programs can be framed as economic development, or immigration policy, or technological competitiveness. Victoria had faced similar challenges as Second Foundations had grown. The key is maintaining clarity about your core mission and values, even when that means saying no to opportunities that might seem beneficial in the short term. Marcus nodded. "We've had to turn down several potential partnerships with governments that wanted to use our programs to discourage worker migration or to focus exclusively on training for specific industries. Those approaches might serve political objectives, but they don't serve the workers we're supposed to be helping." This conversation reflected a broader challenge that both Marcus and Victoria had grappled with as their work had gained influence and recognition. Success created new opportunities, but it also created new pressures to compromise the principles that had made success possible in the first place. The tension came to a head when Marcus was offered the position of Director General of the International Labor Organization, one of the most senior positions in global workforce policy. The role would give him enormous influence over international labor standards, employment policies, and workforce development programs worldwide. But accepting the position would also mean leaving the direct program work that had always been the source of his effectiveness and satisfaction. The Director General role was primarily administrative and political, focused on managing relationships between governments, employers, and labor organizations, rather than developing and implementing programs that directly serve displaced workers. Marcus spent weeks considering the offer, consulting with colleagues, mentors, and friends about the potential benefits and drawbacks. The opportunity to influence global labor policy at the highest levels was unprecedented, but he worried about losing touch with the grassroots work that had given his career meaning and purpose. The decision became clear during a visit to the Bangladesh Textile Cooperative Program that had been one of his first international initiatives. Marcus spent 3 days working alongside cooperative members, learning about their challenges and successes, understanding how global economic forces affected their daily lives and long-term prospects. On his final evening in Dhaka, Marcus sat with Rashida Begum, one of the cooperative's founding members, sharing tea and reflecting on how much had changed since the program began. Before the cooperative, Rashida told him, "I worked in a factory where I was just a pair of hands. The supervisors didn't know my name, didn't care about my ideas, didn't value my experience. Now I own part of the business, I train new members, and international buyers know my work by name." Marcus asked her what advice she would give to someone in his position, facing the choice between direct program work and high-level policy influence. Rashida considered the question carefully. "In my experience, the people who make the best decisions about work are the people who understand work from the inside. If you stop doing the work yourself, if you only talk to other people who make policies but don't live with the results, how can you know if your decisions are good ones?" Her words crystallized something Marcus had been feeling but hadn't been able to articulate. The Director General position would give him formal authority over global labor policy. But it would also separate him from the experiences and perspectives that made his work authentic and effective. Marcus declined the Director General position and instead proposed creating a new role within the UN system, Special Representative for Worker-Centered Development. The position would allow him to continue developing and overseeing direct service programs, while also having a platform to influence international labor policy based on evidence from those programs. The proposal was initially met with skepticism from some UN officials who questioned whether such a hybrid role could be effective. But Marcus's track record of translating grassroots success into policy influence ultimately convinced the Secretary General to approve the new position. The special representative role allowed Marcus to spend half his time working directly with programs and participants around the world, while dedicating the other half to policy development, international negotiations, and relationship building with governments and international organizations. Victoria supported Marcus's decision enthusiastically, recognizing it as another example of his ability to create innovative solutions that preserved human-centered values while achieving systemic impact. "You've essentially created the job you needed rather than accepting the job that was offered," she told him. "That takes both courage and creativity." Marcus's work as special representative led to the development of the Global Compact on Worker Transitions, an international agreement that established principles and standards for supporting workers affected by economic changes. The compact was signed by 127 countries and became the foundation for coordinated international efforts to address workforce displacement. But perhaps more importantly, Marcus's insistence on maintaining direct program involvement ensured that global policy remained grounded in real experiences and practical solutions rather than abstract theories about economic development. As Marcus approached his 10th year in international development work, he began thinking about legacy and long-term impact. The programs he had helped create were serving hundreds of thousands of people annually and had influenced policy in dozens of countries. But Marcus knew that sustainable change required more than successful programs and international agreements. Real transformation required changing how societies thought about work, aging, displacement, and human potential. It required challenging assumptions about who deserved opportunities and support, questioning economic systems that treated people as disposable inputs, and building institutions that valued wisdom and experience alongside innovation and efficiency. Working with Victoria and other partners, Marcus began developing what they called the Dignity Project, a comprehensive initiative to document, analyze, and promote approaches to economic development that prioritized human dignity and potential over purely financial metrics. The Dignity Project brought together researchers, policymakers, business leaders, and community organizers from around the world to study successful examples of worker-centered development and identify the principles and practices that made them effective. The project's first major publication, Beyond Displacement: Building Economies That Serve People, became essential reading for anyone working on workforce development, economic policy, or social innovation. But Marcus was most proud of the book's final chapter, which featured stories from program participants around the world, describing how their lives had been transformed not just by new jobs, but by renewed recognition of their own worth and potential. One of those stories came from James Chen, the former newspaper editor whose daughter had written a thank-you letter to Marcus years earlier. James had not only found meaningful work with a nonprofit organization, but had eventually started his own communications consulting firm, specializing in helping social service organizations tell their stories more effectively. What Marcus and Victoria understand, James wrote, is that displacement isn't just about losing a job. It's about losing your sense of place in the world, your confidence in your own value, your belief that you have something meaningful to contribute. The most important thing programs like Second Foundations do isn't job placement. It's helping people remember who they are and what they're capable of becoming. Stories like James's reminded Marcus that the work he and Victoria had started in a building's basement had always been about more than employment or economic policy. It had been about fundamental questions of human dignity, social solidarity, and the kind of society people wanted to create together. As Marcus stood before another international audience, this time at the World Economic Forum in Davos, he reflected on how far he had traveled from that October afternoon when he had been living in an alley, wondering if his life had any remaining value or purpose. 10 years ago, he told the assembled business and political leaders, "I was homeless, unemployed, and convinced that society had no use for my skills or experience. Today, I stand before you as someone who has had the privilege of working with hundreds of thousands of people around the world who face similar challenges and discovered that their greatest difficulties could become the foundation for their most meaningful contributions." Marcus paused, looking out at an audience that included CEOs, ministers, and Nobel laureates, people whose decisions affected millions of lives and trillions of dollars in economic activity. The question I want to leave you with is this. How many Marcus Riveras are there in your communities right now? How many people with valuable skills, deep experience, and enormous potential are sleeping in shelters, standing in unemployment lines, or sitting at kitchen tables wondering if they have anything left to offer the world? He gestured toward Victoria, who was sitting in the front row, remembering the woman who had given him a chance when no one else would. The answer to that question will determine not just the success of our economic systems, but the character of our societies. Because in the end, how we treat people when they're most vulnerable reveals who we really are and what we really value. Marcus concluded his remarks with a story about Rashida Begum and the textile cooperative in Bangladesh, about Fatima al-Rashid and her work saving children in conflict zones, about Elena Rodriguez and her infrastructure projects, about thousands of other people whose lives had been transformed not by charity, but by recognition of their inherent worth and potential. These are not stories about helping the helpless, Marcus said. These are stories about recognizing the hidden assets in our communities, about seeing potential where others see problems, about building economic systems that serve human flourishing rather than just financial returns. The standing ovation that followed was gratifying, but Marcus knew that the real measure of success would be found in the actions that audience members took when they returned to their offices and communities. Would they hire older workers? Would they invest in retraining programs? Would they challenge assumptions about who deserved opportunities and support? After the presentation, Marcus and Victoria walked through the snowy streets of Davos, reflecting on a journey that had taken them from a broken elevator to the global stage. "Do you ever miss the simplicity of those early days?" Victoria asked. "When it was just us trying to help one person at a time?" Marcus smiled, his breath visible in the cold mountain air. "I miss the directness of it, the immediate feedback, the personal connections. But I don't think what we're doing now is really different from what we started with. We're still helping one person at a time. We're just doing it through systems and programs that can reach more people simultaneously." Victoria nodded, understanding what he meant. Every policy we influence, every program we create, every partnership we build, they all come down to individual moments when someone realizes that another human being believes in their potential. Exactly. Whether it's happening in a basement in our building or in a conference room at the United Nations, the fundamental transaction is the same. One person choosing to see the best in another person, especially when that person has forgotten how to see the best in themselves. As they walked back toward their hotel, Marcus and Victoria passed a small group of hotel workers clearing snow from the sidewalks. The workers looked up and nodded respectfully as they passed, not recognizing them as international development leaders, but simply acknowledging them as fellow human beings navigating the same snowy evening. In that moment, Marcus felt more connected to his core purpose than he had in any conference room or policy meeting. These workers, whose names he didn't know, whose stories he would never hear, were exactly the people his work was ultimately meant to serve. Not as objects of charity or development interventions, but as individuals with their own skills, dreams, and potential for contribution. "That's what I want to remember," Marcus said quietly to Victoria, "that behind every statistic, every policy proposal, every funding request, there are real people with real lives who deserve to be seen clearly and treated with dignity." Victoria squeezed his arm gently. "That's what you've never forgotten, Marcus. It's what made you save a stranger in an elevator, and it's what makes your work at the UN effective. You've never stopped seeing people as people." As they reached their hotel, Marcus looked back at the workers who were still clearing snow under the streetlights. Tomorrow he would return to meetings about global workforce policy, international funding mechanisms, and strategic partnerships. But tonight, he carried with him the reminder that the most important work always came down to one human being helping another, one moment of recognition, one act of faith in the potential that exists in every person, regardless of their current circumstances. The elevator in their hotel was modern and efficient, nothing like the unreliable system that had first brought Marcus and Victoria together. But as they rode up to their respective floors, both of them remembered that day when mechanical failure had created the conditions for human connection, when being trapped had paradoxically set them both free to become more than they had ever imagined possible. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.